All right, to my guest, thank you so much for coming back on the show. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Thank you for having me. I feel like I'm like the big OG of the show. And
Right?
I've just been doing great. Just moved into a new home, just doing more business, healing more hearts.
Okay.
Just all of that all the time.
Well, if you are new to the show, my guest, who is also my therapist, Dina, she's been on the show. I think this is your third time now, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. So tell people what you've been up to. Congratulations on your new home. She's up here
Thank
healing
you.
hearts, everyone. She definitely healed my little tiny black heart.
What have I been up to? Well, I'm in a doctoral program now,
Okay.
because I feel like that's the next step in my life. I'm always trying to learn. So
Always.
it's been amazing. It's also been a bit stressful, but also in my private practice, just still taking on clients and, working with people through some of their traumatic experiences, childhood trauma, relationship trauma, which is something major, and also something that I'm probably going to do my dissertation on.
Okay, come on,
And just kind
dissertation.
of trying to have a good work-life balance.
Yeah. I'm
Hmm.
super excited that that we are doing this. I'm surprised we haven't thought about this sooner because I think this will be so cool, especially with the type of episodes that or the type of
Hmm.
conversations that I have for
Yeah.
a licensed therapist to come on and to provide insight on how to
Hmm.
navigate
Hmm.
because there are a lot of people who can relate to these stories, hence the reason why the
Yes.
show is so popular. So I really appreciate you for coming on and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was so much fun just kind of getting the opportunity to listen to each episode, but also use my therapist's brain
Yeah.
because I'm always like yelling at the TV when I'm watching TVs. I'm like, trauma, you know? And when I was able to actually do that as I listened to the episodes and like jot down some notes too. So if you see me looking down, it's because I was definitely trying to take some notes to be like, this was out of this world.
Right. So as a therapist, when you hear stories like this, how do you process it? Like, because I can only imagine like you constantly
Mhm.
hearing about trauma over and over and over again. So what does that processing look like for you?
It looks different now than what it looked like 10 years ago. So I've been in private practice now over 12, 13 years. And I remember in the beginning having stories like this where I would be like, is this real? Like, is this person, bamboozling me? Like, do I not know enough to be able to read between the lines? But the
Right.
more I became more experienced and just read more and, had more of these stories, they're absolutely true. And I don't get the like, oh, factor
Hmm.
when it happens. Oftentimes I feel more empathy. Sometimes I feel much, like a great deal of sadness, for my clients when it's happening. And I'm able to like help them because I've had so many of these stories at this point.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I'm pretty good. Like it takes a lot for me to be like, oh my God. But with the
Hmm.
stories we picked today, I was just like, oh my goodness. Like
Hmm.
I just could not believe some of the things that I was hearing. We're gonna start with the first episode was my father mistress killed my mother. And I don't know
Okay.
if I shared this with you, but that was one of my most difficult conversations I ever had since I started the
Hmm.
podcast. Like I wasn't gonna
Hmm.
put this episode out.
Okay. What made that difficult for you? Was it more of the kind of childhood experience she had, or like, because there was so many layers to this story?
Right. I think for me is when she started to tell us more about what happened to her mother. Her to me, it
Hmm.
sounded like her voice changed. It sounded like she reverted back to talking as if she was a child because she was reliving that moment as she was sharing the story. Did you catch that?
In some ways, I kind of felt like she reverted to that, but I think in some ways, and with all due respect to her, I think she's never actually got out of that childhood phase, right? So
Right.
whenever, we go through trauma, whatever year that is, right, whatever age you are, oftentimes the mind stops growing, right?
Mm,
And you can continue to have these childlike behaviors. Um,
right.
so it's why in some of her instances, it may have seemed like she went into this childhood place, but I think in totality, she has not really grown mentally, to be a full adult.
Right. It's like she stopped at a certain age.
Yes.
Cause I was just like, I don't know. It was so hard. And I remember having a conversation with my network, and I was like, I
Hmm.
don't think I'm gonna put this episode out because it was just a lot on it was just so many different layers when it came
Yeah.
to her story. And just beyond the title of it with her mom being the focal
Yes.
point, but her just
Yes.
going through abuse and stuff. And then her being who she is now as a 50-year-old woman. I was
Yep.
just like, girl. So as a therapist, how do you hold space for a story that's so layered with grief, trauma, and betrayal?
I mean, for me, I definitely try to meet a client where they are in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the thing about being in a therapeutic relationship with clients or starting their therapy journey, I would say more so. Um, they may start with like talking about this one story, but because it's so layered, you really can't get to like the meat of it or like the deeper part of it.
Right.
So, and you've experienced this with me. Sometimes we'll have, and I call myself sort of therapy as conversational style. Like we'll have these conversations and then something will come up and then I'll start to say, okay, tell me a little bit more about that because that's standing out to me, which will, unpeel another layer. So for me, I try to definitely create a safe space for them, but I'm also not trying to push them and say, well, next week we're going to start right here again. They may not be there next week, right? But if we
Yeah.
have that therapeutic relationship, we're going to get to it at some point. And sometimes this, as crazy as this may sound, sometimes a lot of it may not be mattering in their life at that point
Mm-hmm.
until, like in her situation, maybe she's talking about like the sexual side. She can't really be intimate, right? So that's when we'll go into like more of your childhood stuff. What has happened
Mm-hmm.
in your childhood that has created this avoidance or, this feeling that you don't have the desire for sex. But let's
Right.
say 2 sessions before that, we were just talking about, her having a bad day at work. I'm not going to relate that to that.
And
So in
that's
me
two different
holding
things.
space,
Right.
yeah, I'm trying to be there with her in that moment, not force her, not push her, talk about things that's relatable to where she is in that time.
I was just thinking, like, girl, what does me having to bust a nut got to do with me not want to be at work?
Exactly, right. But you have some therapists, and I think, in the style of therapy where they just want to kind of continue on, right? So we talked about
Yeah.
this. And I've been in therapeutic situations like that too, because I'm a big advocate for therapy and have been in therapy so long in my life. And if things come up today, I'm like calling my old therapist, like, hey, we need to have a session, right? Because
Right.
this is affecting my life. And some therapists will like continue on, right? The next time you meet them, so let's pick up where we left off at, more psychoanalytical, but mine is a combinational style.
Yeah. So what were some key moments for you when you were listening to this episode? And then when you once you got done with the episode, or maybe when you saw the title, like what were your thoughts
Mhm.
about it? Like were you shocked or were you like, girl, like
To be very honest, the episode was heavy for me. Like, I was just like, and I think more of it was her childhood trauma. I really relate to childhood trauma because I've experienced my own, most of my clients that I work with in therapy have experienced childhood
mm-hmm,
trauma. It is my love. Like, I really love helping people to like dive deep into that trauma so that their lives can be fulfilled today. So when she started talking about like the sexual abuse, also, like, no one even told her that her mom died. Like,
that was
and
crazy.
that is insane to me. And it is one of the reasons why, right, people don't heal because you don't sit down and have that age appropriate conversation that this person has left their, they've moved
Right.
on, they've died, they've whatever, they've moved to a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Families don't know how to do that, especially in the Black and Brown community. I think we oftentimes, and we're much better at that, I think, in some ways now today. But in the past, I think it was so much easier to just let this child like roam around the house and just feel like her mom is coming back at some
That
point.
was crazy.
And I was just like, hello, can someone just tell her, sit down with her, right? Hey, help
Like
her
this
to
is her
grieve.
mom.
This is her mom. This is an influential person in her life, and she's never coming back. Like, did anybody ever think of that? But I also thought about the layers of the grandfather being abused, right? And him being too afraid. The aunt being abusive and the brother being abused. I was just like, this is so much. Like, it was
Yeah.
very heavy. Yeah.
And normally for obviously because I experienced my own childhood trauma, so certain
Hmm.
episodes that revolve around that is a little triggering for me. But that one took the cake. I was like,
Yep.
I was like,
Yep.
this is a lot. Like, I was trying my best during that episode not to like not to show too much emotion and get too invested in the
Hmm.
story because I don't want to trigger myself. But man, once I got done with that recording, I think I started crying. It was just too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely had to go off and like do some meditation, some releasing because it was weird because at first I was like, why do I feel so heavy? Like I listened to it early
Yes.
in the day and then I was like going about my day, listening to it in the car. And by the end of the day, I really felt like this deep sadness. And then I had to sit down and kind
Yes.
of do a meditation. I was like, oh, it's this episode. It is the things that are coming up from this episode.
Damn, my bad, Dina.
That's okay. That is totally okay. One of the things I also felt really sad about for her is no one protected her, right? Like no one
Right.
listened to her. And that is so prevalent in children's lives, not even just the Black community, but in the Latin
In a
community, right?
child's life.
In a
Yeah.
child's life, all over this world, children are being abused and no one's listening, no one's hearing, no one's protecting.
Yeah. So what is your advice when it comes to some coping strategies for survivors of family related trauma?
I think my main coping strategy is therapy always. Like I
Yeah.
feel like, and finding the right one. Like in my own therapeutic journey, I've done EMDR, I've done psychoanalytical, right? And I think, going into that deeper childhood trauma to be able to one, validate that I'm feeling this way, right? Validate
Mm-hmm.
that that person is feeling that way and that these things happened a way, the way they believe they happened. Now, of course,
Right.
as a therapist, sometimes you're not only just taking things as face value, you're digging deeper, but you want to feel validated that I'm not crazy, that I was
Right.
abused, that no one protected me. The other thing I think as they're going along in their therapeutic journal is, journaling their own feelings and, really getting their feelings out, whether it's an audio journal, whether it's writing it down. Also, right, investing in nurturing, trusting friendships, right? People
Yeah.
that are different from what you experienced as a child. Oftentimes we grow up and we continue these toxic relationships that just continue
Mm.
to make us feel unheard, right? Make us feel like invalidated. But as you go through your therapeutic journey and healing through this trauma, you want to start nurturing some better relationships, some better friendships that can be loving. Because I can
Yeah.
probably, in my mind, guarantee that she married a man that was not listening, not nurturing any of these things. Yes, she has a beautiful child out of this,
She
but
married what she knew from her
she
past.
married what she knew, which just perpetuates, all of those feelings of abuse.
Now, before we move on to our next episode, I know grief is grief, right? But how does grief due to violent loss show up differently than any other types of grief? Because I feel like when the loss is like very intense and violent,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it may show up and impact the person way differently than how like with my grief with losing my grandmother.
Yeah, yeah. One is, because it's like violent and it's unexpected, right? I
Yeah.
think the grief is so much more deeper because it is unexpected. And it does affect people so much more because they're thinking, like, what could I have done different that day? How could I have changed that
Right.
situation? There's so much anger toward the perpetrator, right? That person. So it's so
Hmm.
many layers to it. It's not like losing your grandmother. You're not like the nurses, the nurses, they did this. Unless it was a situation like that. If it's from old age, you're like, she's lived a full life. At some point, we knew this was going to happen, right? The expectation. But when it's expected, there's all of this, there's anger, there's shame, there's, all of this guilt that's also in it, that's involved in that, which creates a different type of grieving process, right?
Yeah. So next
Yeah.
up, my ex was a serial killer. So what was going through your mind as you heard this story
Oh my
unfold?
God. I have to start with I love her personality. I think that she definitely is in a place in her life where she understands that it's not her fault, right? There were all of
Yeah.
these reasons why she got into it. But as I was listening to it, at one point she definitely said, I came from I believe a two-parent household, like a Christian household, things like that. I always tell people don't believe the hype, right? Coming from a two-parent household, right, a Christian household they have trauma too, right? They
Yeah.
got abuse, they got all of that, the dynamics and relationships, right? Where you sometimes see the dad comes home, he don't talk to nobody. The dad, the mom and the dad don't talk. And maybe I have a great relationship with my dad, but my dad doesn't show anybody else love in the house. And
Hmm.
again, we attract to what we know. We
Right.
tolerate what we know, right? So I think some of that in that relationship was tolerance based on her own ability to handle certain dynamics of relationships. The other thing I think she mentioned early on is like everybody was saying to her, like, when are you getting married? When are you getting married?
Right.
Society pressures women, especially, and we have this biological clock that's always ticking, right? And we want these things, children, marriage, all of that, where
Right.
sometimes you get to the point in your life where you're like, I have to make this work, right? He has,
Yeah.
some of the qualities, but I have to make this work. And when
Right.
I talk to clients, I'm like, no, 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 you need your list of non-negotiables. What's your ideal person? Because how do you know if this person is even someone that you remotely date if you don't even know what you're looking for? Right. And when we
Hmm.
don't know what we're looking for, it's how we get into these relationships, right, with someone that's just good enough.
Yeah. Because that was crazy. I was like, girl.
Insane.
And he didn't
Insane.
look like nothing. She said the sex
No.
was horrible. I'm like, girl, what we doing here?
And at some point, you got to ask yourself, and I've been there, done that. At some point, you got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Like,
Why am
what
I
is
doing this?
happening? Why am I doing
Right.
it? What am I really getting out of this? And do I not love myself? An inkling of enough to continue
Mm.
to put myself in these situations. Like, at some point, we got to have those conversations where we're getting that ick in the middle of our stomach that's saying, he ain't about nothing. The sex ain't good. I don't feel like he's really dating me, courting me. Like, what am I doing this for?
Like, what is
You
this
know?
for? Right. So, what does
Absolutely.
this kind of betrayal do to someone's ability to trust themselves again? Like, for me, disappointment is a really hard pill for me to swallow. So, what would be
Yes.
your advice to that? Because I feel like with her, it wasn't more so him, it was more so her decision on allowing him to be in this space with her. And then she had a kid with him. I was
She
like,
had a kid with
man.
him. The major thing I tell people is reflect on where you were when you started, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I started with this person 5 years ago, and 5 years ago I was
Mm.
desperate, right? One of the episodes was like I was desperate. I was desperate. I really wanted something to work. I was just, in a place where I was holding on for dear life. But let's say 5 years forward, where I am today, I love myself. I know I'm not going to do that. I can't
Right.
judge myself where I am today, 2025, from what I did in 2020. Because in 2020, I didn't have the knowledge, right? Or
Right.
that experience to actually say I could have made the same decision. So,
Right.
people always like hindsight is 2020. Yeah, it is. But also looking back then, I didn't have the knowledge to make that better decision 2020, right? So
Right.
one, look at where you were in that time and really reflect on, well, of course I would have made that decision because this is all the thoughts that I was thinking. This is
Right.
everything that I was going through then. When you do that, you allow yourself some grace, right? And you allow
Mm.
yourself to say, you allow yourself to be like, I'm not going to blame me, right? I know where I was and it was inevitable. If I didn't attract him, I was going to attract another him that was very similar to him, right?
Yeah.
But today I know that I would never be in a situation like that because I know too much. I've done too much. So one really starting to validate, right, where you were back then can really, really support you in trusting who you are today and moving
Yeah.
forward.
But is there a thin line between not knowing and ignoring your intuition?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. Not knowing is I absolutely just didn't know, right, that this person could be like this, right?
Yeah.
They weren't showing me any signs, right? Maybe he was going to work and coming home and doing all these things and taking care of the household and loving and kind. And
Right.
you have situations like that too, right? Where people really keep up the front the whole time until everything explodes. But when
Right.
you get those little, crumbs along the way of this
Facts.
person kind of doing things, then this is you really not wanting to adhere that the mouse is coming, right? Eating up the crumbs. You don't want to adhere to that, right? And
Right.
oftentimes because I'm afraid of what is to come, right? Maybe I'm afraid of that conflict with that person,
Mhm.
and I don't have enough support. The other thing about that is, you have to be able or willing to let someone in the system, right? The police department, which some of those things she did, family members, right? But some of it is also just getting yourself out and just being safe. And I always say it's better to ask for forgiveness than, say I'm sorry in the beginning, right?
Right,
Or whatever
right.
it is you say. Get away as far as you can, and then you talk about it later, right? Because family members will adhere to you being gone, right? They're like, oh,
Right.
she's so afraid she had to leave. Versus sometimes you're talking to them and they're like, oh, I don't believe that because he's such a nice guy.
Yeah. So how would you help someone unpack and release the guilt they feel for not seeing the danger? Because I can only imagine how this can affect somebody's psyche for being in love with somebody as
Mhm.
dangerous as he was. And then also
One,
taking his son's life, which was also her son.
yeah, yeah. One, we are going to talk about, well, where were you when you started? Like, what were
Yeah.
some of the thoughts, right? Some of the beliefs that you had when you started. We are going to go into childhood trauma, right? We are going to go into family dynamics. What was your family dynamics like, right? Like we saw that she was like, my father was really supportive, blah, blah, blah. But I have to say this, and with all due respect, where was your father in the beginning, right?
Right.
How was your relationship with your father? Super good. But then this is the type of situation that came in your life, right? Like,
Yeah.
I personally can't imagine, and this is no judgment to her or anyone. I can't imagine having this loving, kind relationship with your dad, right? Very open and warm and all of these things with your dad and your mom. And then you have a situation like this, and you either can't talk to them, they don't believe you, they're not telling you, yo, let's get your stuff. Like I've seen parents, right? And I've
Mm-hmm.
had my own parents come and pack my stuff up, like, we going. You're not living here no
Yeah.
more. I don't care what you say. You're not talking to me, not living here, right? Because they know the dangers. So I have to question a little bit of that too. What was the dynamics of those relationships? And I would
And
do that with a client.
yeah, and then the fact that he raped her sister, I was like, this nigga was wilding.
Yes, he was just on his own, a rampage, and your
Right.
family. But I'm also thinking, like, where was everybody? How was this
Right.
happening?
Right. I'm not gonna lie, with that particular episode, I was thinking about a lot of different things. One, like how you mentioned how society really put a
Hmm.
crazy amount of pressure on women
Hmm.
to feel the need to either get married or to have babies and all this other stuff. And
Hmm.
kind of like, I feel like it really forces her hand. And this is how she got into this unfortunate situation. But then I also feel like this episode made me realize that um, we have a really unhealthy relationship with trauma porn. And
Yeah.
the reason why I say that is because obviously in her book, she is very detailed about every single thing. But for me, I feel like I've been in a shift where like I don't want to always talk about or display trauma. Like I understand that the nature of
Hmm.
the conversation, but like I don't think that I need to ask somebody who lost their child, how did her child die?
Yes.
And that
Yes.
is something that a lot of people's like, you didn't go into that part with details. And I'm like, why do I need to go into details? Her child is dead.
Yes. Yes. And
Right.
that's
And I
the
was
same thing that I would do in therapy too. Like there's some things I don't need to know. And I will say to a client, is that something that you want to talk about? Right. And
right.
if they say no, I'm leaving it like that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I can get my answers to help you heal in other ways. I don't have to
Yeah.
go into that day and all of those things that happen that day, right? I can take it for face value. I also, am emotionally intelligent enough to know the emotions that come with you losing a child and what probably led up
Yeah.
to it. But some people are really quick to just be like, well, tell me what happened that day.
Yeah.
How?
Right, right. Like that I just thought that was just so crazy because you cannot even imagine how many people hit me up and was like, hey, like why you never asked her like what happened? And I'm like, so buy her book, support her.
Read the book,
Read
pick the book up and then you'll be able to know.
right. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
next conversation. This was part of the men series, which I absolutely love the fact that we have the men
Mm-hmm.
series now.
Mm-hmm.
I was sexually abused by a woman. What were your thoughts on that one?
I was a little, I don't know if he had a lot of nervous energy because it didn't feel to me as serious as it really is. And maybe
Hmm.
because he was younger, and all of this, had happened when he was younger. No judgment to him, but it just felt like it was kind of a matter of fact, which led me to believe it's because society treats it as it's a matter of fact, right? When a man
Right.
is assaulted by a woman. So, how could this man really grieve this and really feel the intricacies and, shame and guilt and all of that, that a woman often sometimes can't feel either, but it's more accepted when she gets raped or sexually assaulted? It's because society didn't accept it, right? So, he has to see it more lighthearted, than what we would see it if we were being interviewed like that.
Yeah. So, what are some misconceptions people have about male survivors? Because I do feel like when a man is sexually abused by a woman, it is not taken seriously. And I do feel like now a lot of men are starting to come out and share their
Mhm.
stories, which is forcing societies to reshape the narrative around survivors and what it looks like.
I mean, are they? I mean,
Right.
I still don't feel like society is reshaping it. I think we have a group of people that's yelling, right, that this is
Right.
happening, but I don't think we have enough people to actually say this is serious, right? And some of the misconceptions is that, men overpower women. So how did you let that happen, right? You let
Right.
that happen. And I found myself honestly too, in one moment, I'm like, well, why you just didn't like push through the door? And then I had to think to myself, one, he sounds like he was really raised well by a mother who was like, don't hit women, right? Don't, get into those situations. He was also in the military, so I know he was like, I'm not trying to lose my military,
Yeah.
career, right, by putting hands on this woman, and it's her word against mine.
Right.
I also had to think of his childhood trauma too, but I feel like one, we think that men should overpower women. I think one, we think, and this was mentioned in your episode, that men always want sex. Right. They're always
Yeah.
going to want sex, and this is going to happen. The other thing is, I don't think people understand when you're being sexually assaulted, raped, or whatever. Your body sometimes gives into this thing. It doesn't mean this act. It doesn't mean you want it, but the body is going to do what it does, right? So
Right.
sometimes people are like, well, they gave in, right? They must have wanted it. No, no, no. Your
That's your
body
body responding
still,
to it.
right. Your body still responds to being touched, right? Physically touched in certain places. Doesn't mean when you're done, you don't get up feeling disgusted and horrible, right? So
Right.
I think those are some of the misconceptions. Of course, society feels like men always want sex. Their mind is always on sex.
That's why I love Law and Order SVU
Me
because
too.
my girl Olivia, she taught me that like she was talking to one of the rape victims and she was pretty much telling her like your body was responding to it. That doesn't mean that
Yeah.
you want it. It's just that's just how the body operates.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
didn't
And
know
it
that.
Me neither. I never knew that. And then I started researching more, especially doing
Hmm.
more trauma research. And I was like, wow, it's so true. Even with women, like they'll feel like, well, I got aroused, but I didn't want it. No, your body is going to respond and react. But again, because society feels like men always want sex, they're always thinking about sex, then we don't have to even really take this that serious. It's so
Yeah.
funny. My husband and his friends, I used to always think the same way. I'm like, men always talking about sex when they together. They're talking
Hmm.
about women, their bodies, whatever. And I remember being around him and his friends one day, and I go down to like peek, like in the basement to see what they're doing.
Not you
They
being
down there.
nosy.
Yes, I'm always nosy, asking questions, doing things. Um, and they down there like playing their video games and having like rap battles, right? They all in their 40s now and they having their rap battles and they're drinking their beers and they're talking. And I text my girlfriend, I'm like, men ain't always talking about sex when they together. I'm like, these mofos down here having rap battles like in my basement, you know? And from then I realized like, men enjoy each other's company, especially when
Yeah.
they're, healthy men together. You do
Hmm.
have that group of men that is talking about women and bodies and stuff, but you have the most of, a majority of men that are healthy and really just enjoy the camaraderie of friendships, right? And talking
Yeah.
about other things.
Yeah. So wait, so before we started recording, y'all, we was gonna keep. I was like, no, let's just save it for the episode. Is this the
Mhm.
episode that you listened to with your husband?
I listened to the next one with my husband.
Oh, okay, okay,
Mhm.
okay, okay, okay.
Mhm.
So how can we, or even therapists or friends or partners, like how can we minimize male trauma. Because I think you make a good point, especially with society. Like we're always saying when men want sex, are you sure that's what men do? That's what boys do? And it's like, no, you were sexually abused, you was taken advantage of. So how can we encourage more men to like speak up for themselves and to share their stories?
Number one, being a mother of a 30-year-old male, and I
Damn,
have
he
male
30?
cousins. He's 30. I have a ton of
Wow.
male cousins in my family,
Mm-hmm.
and I truly love to create a safe environment for them where
Mm-hmm.
they understand that their feelings are valid. You know, they can talk, and I'll get a text from my little cousins at like 8:30, like, when you get up, you need to text me, call me, and they'll tell me about situations with them and a female and what should they do and blah blah blah. And I first let them know, like, your feelings are valid, right? And don't feel like you're being a punk or, anything because you have these emotions. Like, they're real, they're valid.
Right.
So I think first creating those relationships where men actually feel comfortable talking to you, whether you're their sister, their friend, their colleague, whatever.
Right.
And not having the wow factor. Like, sometimes, and I got to do this too. I'd be like, Dina, watch your face, watch your face,
Right, right.
when people say things,
Me
making
too.
sure that you're not like, when they tell you this happened to me, because that face, right, just really shuts people down too, or that body
Yeah.
language. So really helping them to know that whatever experiences, whether they're sad, they had a breakup, whether they felt rejected or abandoned, all of that, right, is
Mm-hmm.
valid. The same way you would do for your female counterparts, do the same for your male counterparts, right? Let them know that all of this is normal feelings to have. And I think we have to start there. Once we
Yeah.
start there, then they feel open coming to us having these conversations. The other thing is not believing, going into it with, these preconceived notions that we have about the world. Well, you sure you didn't go over there wanting that?
Right,
You wouldn't
right.
say that to your friend. You wouldn't say that to your girlfriend,
So why
right?
would you say
You
that to
wouldn't
him?
want anybody to say that to you. So asking questions, right? Like, well, did it feel like you were being overpowered? Did this feel like this was happening? Like, give me your words, right, of what happened that day. And then also asking people, how can I support you? Right? What would you
Yeah.
like me to do? I always say to my little cousins and my son, I'm like, okay, now that you've told me all of this, what do you feel like you need?
Right.
And they'll say, well, I just needed to talk about it. Or sometimes they're like, well, I need someone to help me do something about this. And then I'm like, okay, how can we do that? So the biggest thing too is asking people, how can I support you? What would you need from me? What is your goal after all of this? Sometimes we just jump in and we want to help, right? We're like, oh, you need to call the police, or you need to do this, or you need to tell somebody. They may not want to do any of that. And you
Right.
don't know that because you're just trying to create solutions.
Yeah, because one of my solutions was I was like, you ain't got no female cousins.
I did hear you say that.
I would have fucked Shorty up.
I
Like, what?
know.
That is crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And I also, when I think of that too, I wonder with his relationship with his mom too.
Mm,
Like, my son is 30 and he was in a relationship that was kind of tumultuous too. And I was being very honest with him. I'm like, that relationship is not healthy. I'm like, it's not healthy. This is what it is doing to you, right? This
yeah.
is who you were before that. This is who you are today. And I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you how this is going to turn out. And I wasn't condoning that. I'm like, I don't want them at my house. I don't
Yeah.
want you guys together and pretending like everything is okay. And this is a toxic relationship. Someone's gonna get hurt. I
Yeah.
also involved the mother of that person. I'm like, we need to be involved as a family. Like, what's going on in this relationship? Now
Mm,
fast forward, they've both gotten therapy, they moved out from each other, they worked on themselves, and they're now in a place where they're both really good. But we had to all, as a family, get involved. You guys love each other, but you got some toxic behaviors that are going on. And we
right.
together as a family need to support if you feel like you want this to work out.
Right. Oh, you don't play no games.
No, I was having meetings with them. I was like, okay, we're going to dinner. Let's sit down. And
Right.
I was being honest with her. I'm like, so when are you going to therapy? Like, so you talk about your family and the things that you've seen in your family. This is some of the reasons why these behaviors are happening. I also am very clear with my son. I had my son at 19. And at 19, I wasn't who I am today, right? So I'm sure, I always tell him, I'm sure I fucked you up in some way. So
Right,
I'll say to
right,
him too, right? Some of these behaviors behaviors that you're doing, I think it's because of my own childhood experiences that you had, at 1 years old, 2 years old was around. And I'll say to him too, we need to get you in therapy too, right? I can't be
Yeah.
your only source of conversation. You need to be with someone that can actually unpack these things, right, that you're feeling.
Yeah, yeah. And last but not least for this episode, how can survivors reclaim their identity and masculinity after an experience like this?
I think one, again, reflecting on like where was I during this time and what
Yeah,
happened, but also like being able to forgive, right? Forgive yourself and work on yourself. I noticed he said they
right.
did like mandatory therapy, but they didn't really continue it, right?
Mhm.
He himself should want to continue it because what happened, he also talked about he still was having these types of relationships as he moved forward.
Yeah.
So a major thing is having the courage to put a halt in your dating life, right? In your life
Mhm.
and saying, okay, something's off. And if I'm continuously in these relationships that are abusive and toxic and, being sexually assaulted, maybe somewhere inside of me, I'm attracting or entertaining. And I'm not going to say attract because I think we all attract certain types of people. It's who
Right.
we actually entertain that affects our lives so much deeper. You have to put a halt in your life and say, I need to figure out what's going on. I need to figure out why I'm entertaining these situations and continuously, being in some of these situations, even though I don't ask for it, is what it's leading to. And I think once you start doing that, then you start to reflect on what's going on. Where's the breakdown, right, in my life?
Right.
What is the emotional damage that has happened? And you start to heal through that. And I'll go back to an earlier comment I made, starting to nurture better relationships with yourself, number one, and the
Yeah.
people around you, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, listen, y'all getting some free therapy advice, child.
DinaMolina.com.
Okay. Make sure you give my girl a donation. Leave me a 5-star review, baby. Because Dina not cheap, child. All right. Next episode, one of my favorites, it just came out. I accidentally
Mhm.
took someone's life. This is the one that you and your
Mm.
husband was listening to. What were your thoughts? Did anything surprise you on this one?
My heart went out to her
Same.
from the beginning. One of the reasons, and this was later in the episode when she got arrested, and you were like, dang, you could have beat that. You couldn't have taken it to trial. And she's like, I don't
I
have
have no
trial money.
money. Right.
The system, like our system, this woman who was involved in this accident, right? No one can even give her the financial assistance to be able to support that. Because I also remember Brandy. Remember back in the days, Brandy, the
Yeah,
artist,
right.
was in a
Yeah.
very similar situation where she was in a car accident and someone died. She did zero time. Right, she did
Yeah.
zero time, and that's because of who she is and the amount of money she has. So this woman could have definitely done zero time too, right? Because, if she would have had the finances, but she just seemed like the homegirl that you want to be with. Like her spirit was so, just jovial. But my heart went out to her, and when she first got into the accident and was like flipped out of the car, right? The adrenaline, where she got up and she was walking and then
Yeah.
again found herself in a helicopter and had to go through that year time of being in the hospital. That number one, my husband also went through a very similar situation where he was in the hospital for a year and lost his
Mm.
leg. And some of the conversations we have, today, he was just like, I was just in a place where I was just so depressed, like,
Mm.
things like that. And I had to, people were coming to see me to try to lift my spirits and then having to come home and now she had to go to jail. Like he was able to come home and start to heal from that place. But then she had to go to jail as a
Yeah.
disabled person.
Yeah. Did this episode trigger him or like did it make him reflect on?
No, no, he's like, that happened when he was young. And now, I mean, he's also married to a therapist. So we talk
Right.
about a lot of his trauma often, a lot of both of our traumas often. We've created that space in our household where we're able to do that. But when he was listening to it, he was just like, one, he was like, Ebony definitely answered all the questions. He first came in, he was like, "That's Ebony." I was like, "Yes, it is." And he was like, "Oh my God." So he said she had all the questions that was just on point. I love the interview so much, but he was also like, that's so sad that she had to go
Yeah.
through that and be in a place where, disabilities weren't even really, respected, like not being able to get to some of the programs and things like that she wanted. But also,
Yeah.
people don't get that when you kill someone, right? And so many people in this world are like, I would have just killed him. Okay, but then how do you think your life changes
That
once you
emotional weight.
know exactly
Yes.
that you took a life, right? And someone's blaming you for taking a life.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. This was one of those episodes because I was doing my research, whatever, and I was like, wait a
Hmm.
minute, something's not adding up. Like, I hate when I have to pull in the race card, but I was just like,
Uh-huh.
something's just not adding up. But the other platforms that she was a part of, for the most part that I saw, were all white
Hmm.
men. So I was like, I gotta ask the question.
Oh.
And when I asked her about this person's race, that person's race, and the person who passed away, I was like, damn,
Hmm.
that was
Hmm.
it, it was really heartbreaking because this was a citizen who works for the law,
Yes.
which was crazy
Yes.
to me.
And the man who originally created the whole accident, I can imagine he just lied to the police officers,
Yeah,
right? And probably was like, I just seen it. I just seen the accident happening. I know he also, I feel like, I wanted to feel like he also is living with some guilt,
he
right? Because
has
you could
to,
lie all day long, but at
unless
the
you're a
end of the
demon.
day, right, unless you're a demon or you're a sociopath or a psychopath, right? You have to look yourself in the mirror every day. You have to lay down with
Yeah,
yourself at night. And that accident replays and replays, right? And you have to know at some point, I mean, God is going to let you know at some point that you were
right.
a part of that situation and you created that. So he may have bypassed jail and things like that, but I'm sure emotionally, mentally, he also have gone through some trauma again, unless he's a psychopath
Or a demon.
or a
You know,
demon.
you bring up a good point about how unfortunately these situations are so common because we did hear about Brandy and so many other people who have been in these unfortunate situations. So how do you help someone forgive themselves after unintentionally causing harm?
Well, we'll talk about the entire situation, right? What was that day like, right? What was the decision that they made? Why did they make that decision, right? Like her decision to veer out of her lane into another lane was impulsive, right? And she couldn't
Mm,
have thought of, we do that every day, right? If you're on the highway and someone, you New York traffic, Jersey traffic, things like
child.
that, right? You're driving, someone presses the brakes, you decide to
Mm-hmm.
jump out. If you would have known that things would have been different and it would have turned out to be different, you would have made a different choice. However, you didn't have that ability to do that, right? Maybe moving forward, but also we might always make that same choice because we're thinking of our own lives, right? Because I would have
Yeah,
smashed into the back of a car. So I try to go through detail by detail of what created that opportunity for her to make
right,
that decision in that moment. And clients seeing that, right, or working through that, they realize, it wasn't a fault of mine, right?
right.
It was just what happened in that day, right? Like she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the person that thought, because when many times when you're going to cut someone off, you think about, let me turn here,
I'm getting
right?
my lick
His thought
back.
was to do that. Her thought was to save a life, right? Which was her own. So I
Right.
try to help them to like go through those details, to go through those stories, to see how this was instinctual for her, right? To move and not something that she chose. And people realizing that it wasn't a choice, forgiveness starts to happen.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And I can only imagine a role that guilt and forgiveness played in the
Yep.
process of
Guilt.
healing.
Absolutely. And then
Hmm.
we'll definitely do like, some daily activities when you wake up in the morning, because for some reason, mornings are the hardest when people deal with grief, they deal with trauma, when they
Yeah.
deal with unforgiveness. It's like when you first wake up in the morning, everything hits you.
Hmm.
And giving clients some types of like, activities. So when you wake up in the mornings, you'll sit with yourself in some quiet time, reminding yourself of decisions that you made, things like that. reframing, some of the negative talk that's in your mind that will create a long day of you just belittling yourself or, talking down to yourself,
Or
helping them to
suicidal thoughts.
suicidal thoughts, right? To be
Yeah.
intentional with their days until this becomes like natural for them. So really reframing those narratives that they've been told too, because I'm sure her being in court, reading the newspapers, reading the media, things like that. People are like, she's such a monster, right? This is what she did. They make it sound like she intended to create this entire, situation when she was really just like a pawn in like the entire, game
Yeah.
that was played that day.
And the fact that she was on her way to work, child, as a CEO is crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. The other thing I was thinking is, as the CEO, she should have had legal, they should have given her some type of legal support in that,
That's what I
like
was
the
thinking. I'm like, why did they not support you?
yeah, yeah. And sometimes we don't know that we even have some of those supports. Even when I talk to clients, I'm like,
Yeah.
your insurance covers blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, no one never told me. I'm like, yeah, they're not gonna put that on the website. You gotta call and ask questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely think that therapy would definitely help somebody separate their identity from this incident because I think that once somebody loses their life, I can see how it could be so easy for somebody to just get so swallowed up by the unfortunate
Yeah.
circumstances instead of realizing like it was truly an accident.
Yeah. That is so important that you say that. Like when we get into these incidences, these situations, serial killer, husband, boyfriend, this our identities become that, right? I married a
Yeah,
serial killer. Our identities become I was sexually assaulted by a woman, right? As opposed to, I, didn't really have a choice in this situation
that
sometimes,
part.
right? This happened to me. So when we do, separate ourselves from those incidences, we do actually realize, that we're not that, right? I'm not
Yeah,
just this. This actually happened to me. Right. I
yeah.
had a, situation with someone that was talking about someone who, betrayed them and lied to them and stole from them and all of these things. And they just kept saying, I'm just so stupid. And I'm like, you're not, right? That person did that thing to you. Don't ever forget that, right? I'm a
Yeah,
person here being trusting and someone hurt me. That's not
yeah,
who I am, right? That's what happened to me. And I try to help clients, and I do help clients to understand this thing happened to me.
yeah. But I think you make a good point about just how we speak to ourselves is very important because I know before I
Absolutely.
started therapy, I used to say I was a part or I did this or and I'm like, no, girl,
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. Like you
Yep.
did not have a choice in this.
Yeah. And people do it to us, right? We
Yeah,
get these, think about when we're born into this world, we're like this white sheet, right? We're born, we're innocent. We don't have any of these
a
things.
white
And
sheet.
as we
Yep.
continue, yeah, we're like a white sheet, right? And as we continue to walk through life, people are penning these little labels on us, right? Penning
Hmm.
just a bunch of little labels. Before you know it, we're just filled with post-its, right? With labels
Yeah.
on us, beliefs on us. And it's really up to us to start taking off those post-its and say, this is not me, right? This is what happened to me. This is what someone said about me, but it is not who I am.
Yeah. And last but not least, this is hands down one of my favorite series, my
Yes, this was my
series.
favorite.
I love the spooky series. And my
Mm-hmm.
producer, shout out to Taylor. He just does an amazing job with the sound of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, like so good. So, from the spooky series, My Journey with My Grandfather's Ghost. What were your thoughts about this
Mm-hmm.
episode?
First of all, I love the guest. He was just so like
Right?
cool and yes. This one really also resonated with me a lot because he's biracial and I'm biracial too. And
Wait, I
something that
didn't
he
know
told.
that.
Yes, I am. I mean, my mother be like, your dad is black. My dad is Puerto Rican. My mother is black. My mother be like, we all black.
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
I'll be like, Ma, okay, like I know, but he is Puerto Rican and you're black. And growing
Right.
up in the hood, I grew up in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, and I was
Best I
born in
do
the
or die.
70s. Yes, I grew up right in Roosevelt Projects. I was like one of the very few biracial kids in my area, and it was so
Mm.
hard to be accepted by people, right? You're
Oh,
not
so this
Black enough.
episode resonated with you for real.
Yes, you're not Black enough, right, to be one of us. You're very different. You look different. The other thing was I wasn't Puerto Rican enough. I didn't know Spanish, right? And if I did speak a little bit of Spanish, I didn't have the accent. So it was weird being in my father's family because they didn't see me as Puerto Rican, right? I was the
Mm.
Black kid in their family. And then in my own family, I was the light-skinned kid. And though my family loved me, I was still different from most people in my family, just by complexion and things like that. And in my neighborhood, it was horrible.
Well,
I was
yeah, I can
bullied
imagine.
terribly in my schools and things like that. My mom tried really hard to like transfer me out and put me into different schools, but you just don't fit in. There's no place
Right.
to put you.
Right. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. And I don't know if I shared this on the episode afterwards or whatever, or just to my listeners, but I was low key nervous to have this conversation with him because of who he is, because he is a
Mhm,
I always say a world renowned CNN journalist. So I was like, I
mhm,
gotta make sure my questions is on point, all this other stuff. So
mhm.
I'm really happy that you enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed this. Like I think that his story was just so amazing on so many different levels
Mhm.
when it came to race, when it came to
Yeah.
mental health, when it came to just the times. Like I love having conversation that involves history. And then also
Mhm.
like I think he said he's friends with him and Kamala Harris have mutual friends and shit. So I was like, what you,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
He really enjoyed talking to you too.
He
And you were
did.
like, definitely. I was like, yes, get it, girl. Because you definitely showed that you read the book, but you didn't just come with like basic questions. Like you really had him thinking about like how these things affected him and felt for him.
Yeah.
And he pointed that out a couple of times, like, oh yeah, you really read the book.
Yeah. And you know what? His book actually had me crying and it actually made
Yeah.
me want to I think his book, because I think after the conversation we had, we was talking like an hour and some change
Mhm.
later. And I would say that he's probably one of the main people who encouraged me to start having that relationship with my father.
Oh wow.
Yeah, we was talking
That's
about
amazing.
yeah, we was talking about that, and he was like, buy a tape recorder, record everything, because I was just sharing with him about my goals and stuff. And it's so funny because
Hmm.
podcasting has really changed my life, and the
Hmm.
different type of people that I've been so fortunate to meet because of the podcasting has just been
Hmm.
like sometimes it really makes me appreciative and emotional because it's like wow, like who would have thought just talking to
Hmm.
people would be
Hmm.
so influential. But yeah, he was I love talking to him, and to this day we still keep in contact.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, his whole story. I mean, he really didn't share time because I think because of the book, right? I noticed when
Yeah,
you have people with the book, they kind of like give you a little bit, but they like buy the book,
right,
get more
right.
for the book. But you got so much from his story about like his dad and also how his dad doesn't date black women now. Like his dad
Yeah,
was definitely like he don't date black women. That
that was
also must have
crazy.
been hard for him. And then his mom having schizophrenia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he had a lot of layers there
And then
too.
you seeing ghosts. You seeing your white
Yes.
racist granddaddy's ghost.
Exactly. Coming back, and was his grandfather like sitting with him or talking to him? Like, because ghosts could be in so many things. When I talk to clients, sometimes they do talk about like dreams and ghosts and things like that.
Mm.
And we'll talk about like, have you seen them? Are they talking to you? I love that side of therapy. When I
Oh
tell you, don't
wow.
let my clients show up talking about they had a dream. I'm like, oh, let's talk about this dream.
Not just the
And
tea in
I
the
will
dream.
research, yes, because I also have a lot of like dreams and stuff like that, which I
Hmm.
think is weird. I dated well, my son's father was big into like visions and dreams when he was younger. And I feel like from being around him, I became more in tune with like my visions and my dreams. So throughout life, I always know when I'm like not in my spirituality because I don't have any dreams that I remember, but I try to stay like in my spirituality. I try to stay prayed up and things like that because I love to remember my dreams in the mornings.
Yeah.
And my family is always like, girl, please don't tell me your dreams. I'm like, no, you're gonna know. And I'll have dreams of like, I had a dream years ago, one of my friend's husband was cheating, and Told her in my visions at times I can see everything. I can see
Same,
what
me
they're
too.
doing, what they're wearing, where they're at, things like that. So I told her and she didn't believe me. 2 years later, the entire incident happened. The same way
Ooh,
I told her it happened. Yes, and I've had like visions of things that happened in my life like before time. Now I know how to control it. Before I would just be like, oh, it's like a deja vu. But now I'll say, God, just give me the strength whenever that situation is going to happen. Let me know how to handle that. And then when it comes, I exactly know how to handle it. But I still get that flash of like, you've been here before. You knew what this was going to be.
same. I have the same thing. Like a lot of times, like I feel like God has shown me so much. Like sometimes it just feels like a lot of downloads. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's gonna happen. I just don't know when it's gonna happen. One of the things
Yep.
that I think I told you about this, like I had dreams about, I knew when my grandmother was gonna pass. Like I remember that
Mm-hmm.
I had dreams with me joining this network. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
such vivid dreams, and I'm like, and I think that's sometimes the reason why I don't get excited about a lot of things because I'm like, I already saw it before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But you gotta still get excited
I
about it, even
know.
even though you saw it before, because the vision that you're getting is just that this thing is gonna happen, but the
Yeah.
journey is in it actually happening, which is where the excitement comes from.
Oh, maybe I get it. You know what it is? It's a delayed excitement. Like I
Okay,
should be
okay.
excited when it happens, but it probably don't hit me until like a week later. Like, oh shit, bitch, you really did it.
Yeah. For you, like me knowing you, I think because you work so hard to get to these places and you truly manifest these things. Like I remember
Yeah.
first talking to you our first couple of meetings, you was like, I'm gonna be on a network, I'm gonna be doing this.
Right?
And I was like, what? I was like, okay, I'm gonna be in this journey with her. And when it happened, I think because you manifest this, it like the first happenings of it you're not super excited, but as you're
Yeah.
on the journey, you're excited about it because you knew it was gonna happen. Like you created this thing and you knew it was gonna
Yeah.
happen.
I never get excited until about a year later. I'm like, oh shit.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Or somebody reminds you, like, oh my God, you're doing this. You're like, yes, I actually am.
Right. That's a fact, Dina. Dina, we've been doing this for a long time.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
So, how do you distinguish between spiritual encounters and mental health concerns without judgment?
So mental health is different. Like, from what we know about mental health, like if someone is seeing visions and things like that, it's going to come with a ton of other things like erratic
Right.
behavior, right? Manic behavior. So if someone comes to me and I'd like to say that, I have really good relationships with all of my clients, unless you're new and we just didn't really start yet. So
Right.
I usually know their behaviors, right? Like when a client gets on a call with me, and most of mine is on Zoom unless a client is doing something, I could already tell their mood when they get on the
That's true.
call. Sometimes I can even feel their
But you're very
anxiety.
intuitive, though.
I believe I am too. And
Hmm.
I feel like I can feel their anxiety sometimes through a Zoom call, right? I'm like, oh, I feel your anxiety. What's happening? Right. And they're like, hi, okay, let's just get into it. So I think when it comes to mental illness, you're gonna get all these other signs, right? Manic behavior, you're gonna get
Hmm.
depression, you're gonna get anxiety, you're gonna get erratic behaviors, right?
Right.
Decisions that's erratic, right? People that's impulsive, things like that. When it's spiritual, it's much more calm, right? Like a
Yeah.
person can come to you and say, I had this dream and I really don't know how to decipher it. And we'll talk about it. There's no erratic behavior. There's no haste in it, right? It's just really, really calm. Um, Working with a client that has, more spirituality, I would say, like a deeper spirituality, they're more open to talk
Yeah.
about like the unseen, right?
Hmm.
And this is a part of my therapeutic journey that I wanted as a therapist, want to incorporate and have been incorporating more just um, religion and, faith. Because I feel
Mm.
like, a lot of clients that I've worked with, it is very hard for me to say to you, okay, so we can't see that there's a possibility that things can get better, right?
Right.
If you don't believe that there's a higher being, a higher power in this world, of this world, right? So that has been hard in my journey as a therapist. And
Mm.
I'm feeling like just much more comfortable talking about that. Like I'm not gonna say to you, girl, believe in Christ, right? Because
Right.
that's what I do. But I
Jesus
will say,
on Christ.
right. I will say, well, what's your spirituality? Like, what's your spiritual belief? Do you believe that there's a higher power that is, above and beyond us? And when they say yes, my mind is like, yes, because now
Yeah,
we can really say, okay, let's talk about faith. And, when you can't do something, when you can't forgive, when you can't
yeah,
dig so deep in your soul and heal, right? How do we get this to happen with God, right? How do we get this to
yeah,
happen with faith? And it just feels so much more like me, like my world. And I enjoy clients that can do that. Of course, I still have some clients that's like, I don't believe in nothing. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna meet you where you at too. But I think
yeah.
that's, how I tell the difference too, based on your spirituality and our spiritual connection that we can have.
That's why I love your form of therapy and the way you approach it because you include so many different techniques. Like I feel like
Mhm.
you got the obviously you from Brooklyn, so you got the around the way energy, but then you got the obviously you are a professional. You went to school for this, so you have the therapy and the tools and the things that you learn in school. But then you also have like a your approach just always made me feel comfortable, and I feel like you do a really good job with combining them, but also navigating
Mhm.
it to alter how it would feel for that particular client. I think that's really dope because I
Mhm.
feel like some people just have one type of technique, but that one technique may not
Mhm.
always be the best for every single client that you encounter with.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying that. One of the things I always joke about is like I was a therapist since I was like 7,
Right.
like I was, it was my way of finding peace with friendships. Like, I trauma bonded with a lot of people, but in a way
Mm,
where we talked about like our trauma, but I always had solutions for people. I was like, well, did you try this? Have you tried this?
right.
And, my mother and my grandmother used to always be like, I was very wise for my age. And I would also sit down and talk to my mother about things like, things that hurt and all of those kind of aspects. So I feel
Hmm.
like a lot of my experience came from just life, even though I have the education behind it. Because you can't walk in the door trying to do nothing if you ain't got this education,
Right, right,
all the time.
right.
But a lot of it too is like you having spirituality, you being able to see people where they are, you having experiences. I've also studied in different countries and done, a lot of volunteer experience in other countries around other races and cultures. And that also
Hmm.
supports, being able to help a regular client from Brooklyn, right? Because I
Right,
can see things in a very much different way. So I think that also supports me being able to have like all these different forms and techniques and things like that. I'm also not afraid to get outside of the box. Like I may not look like your normal
right.
therapist, like a client and I were talking yesterday, she was saying it was her birthday. I was like, I really want to be that therapist that sends people a postcard. And she was
Yeah,
like, well, what do you think? Do you think people would feel like that's, crossing their boundaries? I'm like, I don't know. The clients that I have, they would be like, oh my God, she remembered my
right,
birthday. Right. And I'm like, I mean, your dental office will send you one, right? Your doctor's office will send you one. Why not the person who knows your inner, deeper secrets, right? That
right.
is one of your biggest cheerleaders in life. Why not them saying happy birthday? I've witnessed your journey over this year. I think to me that would be so much more amazing than getting a damn card from your dental office,
Right,
someone who
right.
doesn't know you.
Like it
But I
shows
think
that you care.
it shows that you care. And I always want clients to know that I care. I'm a human
Yeah,
and you're a human. And though you're sitting here, telling me all your deepest secrets, I don't want you to ever feel like, well, I don't know her, right? I don't know this person. I'm just talking to her. She's just giving me solutions. I want us to know each other. And that's how healing happens.
yeah. To wrap up this episode, I really enjoy my spooky series. So spooky series come out every October
Mm-hmm.
because I love scary shit. And but I also think that with this series, it adds such a more of a deep emotional layer when it comes to the
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. So what message do you think listeners should really take away from the spooky series when it comes to stories like these? Because the forgiveness with the whole racism with his grandfather's ghost, like
Mm-hmm.
that was just so crazy to me. Like that hands down, that was like one of my favorite episodes from Spooky series.
Yeah. I think when it comes to like family members, ancestors, things like that showing up or you constantly thinking about them, you really
Right.
reflecting on why do I think this might be coming up in my life? You know, like sometimes when clients talk about a dream, I'm like, okay, like, so what's going on in your awake life that might be bringing up this, you
Right.
know, these things in your when you're sleeping, you're most vulnerable. So I would definitely say to clients, like, really question, why is this coming up, right? Why am I dreaming about this? Why am I possibly seeing this person? Is there some unresolved issues there, right? Am I not getting something in certain relationships that I'm in, and it's why I'm dreaming about these things? Like, you know, don't feel embarrassed about it, right? Sit down with yourself and ask yourself these questions, because these things show up for a reason. These spirits, right? These ghosts,
Right.
quote unquote, right? You know, these things show up for a reason in your life, and it's usually to tell you something. And don't be afraid of that. Like, because of society and movies and stuff, we get so embarrassed, like, oh my God, I'm seeing this spirit, right? Or I'm having these dreams. And then we don't really want to think about it. We don't want to process it. But
Right.
that's what keep it coming back, right? Or that's what keeps unresolved issues. Like, don't be afraid to have these things come
Right.
up in your life. They're happening for a reason.
Right, right. Okay, so we almost finished, but a couple of more questions. So, what
Mhm,
advice would you give to listeners who might be triggered by these episodes? And the reason why I ask is because, as you
mhm,
know, I've been having 5 point stars on Apple
mhm.
Podcasts. Please make sure to leave a 5 point star review. And I dropped down to 4.9 because
Okay.
this girl gave me I think she gave me like a 1 2 star review, and she was pretty much saying how she feels as if the question why you looking like that, Dina? Right.
Okay.
And she feels as the way I ask questions can be very insensitive. So she's referring to a conversation I had with my guest
Mhm,
who got herpes from her stepfather, right? So that was a
mhm,
really amazing conversation. But like I feel like I have a really good relationship with my guests where we can have these kind of conversations, and it may come off
mhm,
as being direct, but that's not the case. And I was just like, wow, like I really felt the way that Shorty gave me a one
mhm.
star. But then when I was talking to my guest, because I was like, hey, did I make you feel uncomfortable or anything? And she was like, girl, no, like this was hands down one of the best interviews. But she was like, Ebony, you have to understand, you probably trigger her when
Yes.
you ask that question. So
Mhm.
what's your advice to the listeners who may listen to these episodes, but it's like it may be triggering for them? And then don't give me no 1 star.
Don't listen. I mean, don't
Right.
listen. The thing about podcast, and I hate to be insensitive, but we live in a world where there's so much information around us,
Yeah.
right? And we don't understand that we have a choice, right? So if this triggers me the way this person is asking questions, there's another homegirl situation podcast out there that you can
Right.
listen to that's right for you. There are millions of podcasts out there, right? Or if that episode triggered you, don't listen to that episode.
Right.
The other thing I would say, more clinical side, is sit back and ask yourself, why
Why
is
is this
this
triggering
triggering me?
me?
Right.
Right.
So, did I go through situations in my life where I felt like people were being insensitive, you know, to me, or no one was hearing me or invalidating me? Does it feel like something that I've had, you know, in a situation in my life that I've had before? And if it is, I need to work through that. Like, it ain't your fault. It ain't this woman's fault why you are being
Right.
triggered. Your triggers are yours because you've had situations. That's one thing we don't get either. Is like when we're triggered, right? That person might be triggering us, but that wound is our own, right? It is our own wound that needs to be healed. You know, the
Right.
last thing I'll say is sometimes we have to think about, like, when these situations happen, you know, it's not meant for you to be joking. Like, what I'm trying to say is, like, when you're listening to a podcast like this, and let's say you're, you know, having jokes and kikiing and things like that, it doesn't mean you're being disrespectful. It's your style of interviewing, right?
Right.
And that person who came on your show has listened to all of your interviews before that, or some of them, and have chosen to be on your show. So they already know how you're going to interact with them, right? And
Right.
they've accepted that by coming on your show. So I can't get mad at you saying you kikiing with this person, you're being insensitive. These people do their work before they get on your show. Hopefully they
Right.
do.
Right, right,
Right? They
right.
know your style. Like if Barbara Walters or someone back in the days was gonna interview somebody, they know she getting your business, or she used to, right? So they had to listen to that and think about that before they accepted that time. Oprah asks you all kind of questions. She
So
don't
do,
care.
baby. Right.
Oprah gets in it, right? And before a person goes on an Oprah show, they better be ready. And their PR team better say, you better be ready for her style of interviewing. But I think, what I go back to is her original responsibility to self. If you got on here and you felt like this podcast does not take people's, stuff seriously, stop listening.
Right, right. And then go work on your trauma because to me,
Yeah.
that lets me know that your trauma has been unprocessed.
Yeah. That's like when I see people give a 1-star review on Amazon or something, and then you read their review, they like, I never got my product. You didn't, this is a review of the product. You never got
That's
your
what I'm
product. Why would you?
saying.
If anything, DM you and say, "Hey, this is what I've been thinking. I chose not to leave a review because I feel this way about this situation."
That's what I'm saying. I really felt the way. I was like, girl, I could have 5.0 stars for six
Yeah,
years.
yeah, yeah.
But hey, what do I know?
I mean, you're going to get ones, at one time or another, but you have to take those with the fives, as you move along, and also remind yourself, right? Or you, I think, also reflect on why she said this, right? This is her responsibility to take care of herself too, right? If
Yeah,
this was not her type of episode or type of podcast, it's her responsibility. She really, I mean, it's not your responsibility because you already say in the beginning, this is this type of podcast. We kiki, we laugh, we cry, we do all of this. You say
right.
that in the beginning.
That's what I say. So, for
Hmm.
someone who doesn't have access to a therapist, what tools or practices would you recommend? I feel like therapy is so affordable now. Like people
Me
should definitely have
too.
access to therapy, right?
Me too. Even if you want to work with that favorite therapist and their price is way too high for you, ask them, can they refer you to someone else? For
Right,
someone who don't have, they're not in therapy, it's really hard for you to heal through things unless you are super diligent about reading, right? Reading books, doing research about trauma. Like the web has a plethora of information.
man.
Do the work, read, research, right? Follow things on social media that give you information. Also being aware that not all of that you read and the people you follow are always going to be effective. The reason why therapy is so effective is because of conversations, right? That you're having
Right,
with someone. When you're just reading and you're taking it in, you don't have anybody that's really being accountable to you but you. So you want to also have the therapy side of things. But if you can't, I don't want to say can't afford it because you can get therapy for $25 nowadays on different sites.
yeah,
If you can't, many insurances, therapy is free. If you can't do that, research, look online, follow people on social media that's talking about the thing that really resonates with you, the healing that you need to be doing. And then also do the damn work. Like,
right,
people want to take in things and have conversations. Like, yes, I was triggered and I have trauma and all of that, but are you really doing the work?
right,
Right? When you get triggered, are you just lashing out? Right? Or are
right,
you sitting back and saying, wow, it's triggered. I wonder really where that's coming from. How do I work through that? Maybe let me journal. Maybe let me pray. Maybe let me
right.
talk to someone. Right? It's not just about the talk, it's about also doing the work.
Yeah, I know who therapy they can get for $25.
No, no,
I
no. I used to. I was a
I
therapist, but
remember.
I started
I
with
remember.
$25 an hour. Yeah.
That's so funny. You like, no, no, no.
No, 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 no more.
What makes you hopeful about listening to these stories or just the podcast itself? Because I feel like you have definitely been one of my biggest supporters since I
Yes.
think I started the podcast when I was with you.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. When
Yeah,
I
7
met you,
years
you was
ago.
doing your lashes.
Right.
We was at that like event together, like a women's event, and I met you. And one
Yeah.
thing I'll say is you never changed. Like you never, not that you haven't grown, but your personality have never changed. Some people, when you see them in the beginning and then where they're, quote unquote, successful and doing all these, being seen by people, they change. They don't remember you. They don't talk to you. They don't talk about their, the things that they've done, their journey. They're just a different person. You have been Ebony from day one. Like the
Right.
same person that I've seen in my office, that I met at an event, things like that. You've been the same person and the same positive person. Even in the midst of some of the things that you dealt with, you always
Right.
seen things from a glass half full.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And last but not least, out of all the conversations that we discussed, which story impacted you the most and why?
Wait, first I didn't answer your last one. To your last question, I feel like when I listen to your podcast, it gives people a space that
Hmm.
is not always 100% heavy and tearful and tear
Right. That's how
jerking.
I feel.
Yes, I think your space is needed for people who have worked through their trauma, is still working through it, but don't see themselves as victims, right? And
Right.
you have those podcasts where people are still victims, right? And, they see themselves in that victim state and, they don't trust and life has not moved forward for them. But your podcast is different because people have gone through it, they've worked through it, they're working through it, and they've moved forward in their lives. They're getting married, they're engaged, they have children, all of these things, and they're working through it. And that's why I really, really love your podcast. I didn't answer
Right.
that. I heard,
Me
yeah.
too. And I feel like the podcast is just a testament of the things I went through or just being in some really fucked up situations and thinking that it was going to never end, but it always ends. Tough times don't last, but professional homegirls do. So I really
Yes.
love the stories that I showcase on this on the podcast because I really feel like this is like the pink print to Black womanhood.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes,
Right?
it is. Yes.
Now, last but not least, which story impacted you the most out of all the episodes that we discussed and why?
The one that impacted me the most, I would say, is the first one. Again, I'll go to the first one because of the childhood trauma. And,
Yeah.
it's so representative of the Black community,
Mm,
like people not listening to you, validating your trauma, not even helping you to feel like trauma exists. We sweep it under the rug and we just think that it's going to go away. However, years later, it shows up in all your relationships in your life. And I think that resonated with me so much because it's still happening today.
yeah.
Even though this woman has moved forward through all of this, I think that therapy could really, really help her to have some of the most fulfilling relationships in her life, to feel loved again, to experience intimacy, sexual intimacy, all of these different things
Right.
that was stripped away from her so young. And when she's the reason why I do this work, right? Because when we were children, right, someone told us we were not enough. Someone showed us that we were not enough. We were abused and neglected, and all of these things that make us feel like adults that have no choices in their lives.
Right.
And that resonated for me, and it is the reason why I do the work on myself and others every single day.
Yeah, and that's so funny because that episode, everything that you said, that was the reason why I put it out because she reminded me of my why when it came to the professional homegirl. And I was like, I
Yes.
have to put this out.
Yes, yes. I love too that you always say to them, therapy.
Yes.
Get therapy. Therapy's gonna help. Because even though people, get through some of these situations, I think still just having someone to talk to, whether it's once a month, whether it's once every 2 months, right? Like to be able to continue this growth and this healing. Because though we heal through childhood trauma, it's always going to show up at some place in your life, right? Some little
Yeah.
part of it always lies dormant at some place in your life. And you could be the person who's been in therapy for years, and it takes one thing sometimes to happen where that situation comes back up. So I love that you make that, just key in your conversations with people, but
Hmm.
also like you're so free about it, right? Especially
Yeah.
with Black people, you're like, listen, therapy, go to therapy because you're respected in this community, and people
Hmm.
need to hear that the most respected people like Charlemagne and people like that have done therapy, are doing therapy, and it is so freeing,
Yeah,
right?
no, therapy
To be
changed
in
my
that.
life. I always give you your credit. I'm like, Dina has definitely changed my life. Dina has been a
Yes.
therapist, a sister, sometimes a mother.
I
Like,
know.
I ain't gonna never forget that one time. I just knew we was gonna have a good session. You was like, "What the hell are you doing?" I was like, "What you
Yes.
mean?" And she,
Sometimes with clients, I'm like, okay, I gotta put the clinical side of me on the side,
she
and I
got in
just
my
gotta be your
ass.
sister right now and say to you, what are you doing? They just like,
Right.
oh my God, they start crying. I'm like, girl, like, how are you not seeing that this person is trash?
Yeah, she helped me
Yeah.
get out of a relationship. Like Dina has been so instrumental in my growth. So I am super excited that we were able to do this. Like I think this
Yes,
is
me
definitely gonna bless
too.
a lot of people and encourage people to start therapy.
To start therapy. There's so many ways to get into therapy, and you don't have to do it every single week, right? Do it twice a month, get in
Yeah,
there, give somebody all of those, intricate things that have happened to you. Give it to someone else that can support you through that can hold that for you.
yeah.
I'm 100% sure people are tired of carrying around this load, of
Hell yeah.
heavy weight. Yeah, it's time to
Hell
give
yeah.
it to someone else that can handle it.
Well, Dana, thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell
You're
everyone where they can
welcome.
follow you at, how they can support you, maybe book a consultation with you or book a
Yes.
service. Like, give us your information.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I love spending time with you and being
Yes,
on here. We have our little joke that we're sisters. I
yes,
definitely love that. And I love being able to talk about these stories from a therapeutic standpoint because even though people, tell their stories, I think it's so much more I don't know, like it just helps people to understand that people have trauma, right? They
yeah,
didn't just not see something, right? They didn't just willingly walk into these situations. Our trauma makes decisions for us when we haven't worked through it. And how you
right.
can find me is so simple, dinamalina.com, my website. Though I'm married, I kept my name because I know that people just be like, go to her website, dinamalina.com, and
Right.
you can request a consultation. My consultations are free and we'll just kind of get in there and talk a little bit about what is bringing you to therapy. People usually too are afraid of consultations because they think that when we get in there, I'm going to be like, well, tell me your first experience as a kid. I just really want to know what's bringing you to therapy. You could even be like, I don't really know, right? I just need
Right.
somebody to talk to. Let me figure out what that's going to look like when you get in here. But I think, get a consultation going and then let's chat about what are some goals in your life and what spaces do you feel like you're stuck in?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And we gotta do this every season. Like this was
I
so much
know. I love that.
fun.
I love doing a recap. We could do a recap of all of your stuff. We could talk about just
Yes,
traumatic
yes.
events. Yes. Yes, yes,
Thank you
yes.
so much. And to the listeners, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please make sure to email me at hello@thephgpodcast.com. And until next time, you all, later.
Later.